Back to GM, company now saying it will repay government loans by the end of June. The automaker, which owes the U.S. $6.7 billion, is now 61% owned by the government. CEO Ed Whitacre says GM does not have a timetable for public trading of its shares. We do now want to bring in Bloomberg BusinessWeek's David Welch for more. David, great to see you. How much does GM owe? Let's start there.
Well, they owe $6.7 billion to the federal government, and I think somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion to the Canadian government. But what Chairman and CEO Ed Whitacre was talking about today was just the U.S. portion, which is the $6.7 billion that they say will be paid off around June timeframe, and they'd like to even get that done a little bit earlier.
How will the company pay it back in that timeframe?
Well, it's a little funny. Some of the money will come from the government, which already gave them cash when they exited bankruptcy in July. They gave GM a big pile of cash in exchange for that 61% stake. Some of it will come from the company's own operations, but Whitacre wouldn't split it up for us. GM did generate $3.3 billion in cash in the third quarter, but they also told us that they won't be cash flow positive in the fourth quarter. So you got to figure by June, and there will be a payment schedule between now and then. You'll have some mix of money that we already got from that they already got from the government, and money that's coming out of their operations.
End of the day, what does it mean for GM's value?
Well, if they use a lot of government cash for this thing, by the time they try to IPO, depending on when that is, they could have less on their balance sheet, and the value of the company could be a bit less when they actually go to start selling shares. And, you know, the wild card in here is, does the car market come back, and does GM start to really show some good profitability and positive cash flow on its own next year? And, you know, the more money they generate, the more they could pay out of operations, the more they'd have on their books, and they could have a better value when they finally do go public.
And how does this affect us, taxpayers, our involvement, GM?
Well, one thing to remember here is that there's still a lot of value in government money tied up in the stock of General Motors. So even if the company does pay back the $6.7 billion ahead of schedule, you know, you still have a massive amount of value, well over $30 billion, that's tied up in the equity of the company. And GM, actually, it's about $50 billion that we're going to have to see come back in terms of stock value that the government will eventually have to sell out of in order to recoup the whole investment in GM.
David Welch, thanks so much. Bloomberg BusinessWeek reporter on GM.